It was supposed to be just another ordinary Sunday, the kind where time dragged slowly at Toronto Pearson International Airport. Families hurried to reunite, students clutched backpacks stuffed with memories, and tired business people tapped at their phones, eager to escape another terminal delay. But for Amelia Clark, this day would change everything. Amelia was 29, a florist who had spent the past week on Vancouver Island, surrounded by sea spray, cedar forests, and silence. It was the first vacation she'd given herself in 5 long years, the first time she had stepped away from Maple Bloom, her tiny flower shop in Toronto's East End. She had gone there to breathe, to remember who she was before her ex, Matthew, had chipped away at her confidence. On the island, she had walked barefoot along empty beaches, filled pages of her leather journal with pressed petals, and allowed herself to imagine a future that wasn't just surviving, but maybe, just maybe, thriving. Now she was back at Pearson, suitcase handle digging into her palm, fatigue lining her face. The intercom crackled. Final boarding call for Air Canada Flight 743 to Toronto. She rushed through the gate, weaving between the last stragglers. By the time she collapsed into her window seat, breathless but relieved, the plane had begun its crawl toward the runway. As the aircraft lifted off, Amelia pressed her forehead to the oval glass. Vancouver's green coastline shrank beneath her. She closed her eyes, clutching the thought of her little apartment back in Toronto, a hot shower, her own bed, the faint smell of lavender sachets she tucked into her pillows. That was all she wanted. Just normal. 6 hours later, reality came rushing back in the form of crowded baggage claim chaos. Travelers jostled for position around the carousel, eyes scanning, arms darting. Amelia's shoulders slumped. She spotted a navy blue suitcase, identical to hers, gliding along the belt. Without hesitation, she hooked her hand around the handle and pulled it free. It was heavier than she remembered, but she was too tired to care. She didn't notice that the luggage tag bore a name she had never heard before. She simply rolled it behind her and disappeared into the Toronto night. Across the border, high above the eastern seaboard, another story was unfolding. Ethan Royce sat in the leather seat of his private jet, the Montreal skyline already swallowed by the clouds beneath. He was 33, one of Canada's youngest self-made billionaires, the CEO of Royce & Co., a lifestyle empire built on fashion, fragrances, and the relentless grind of ambition. To the world, Ethan was brilliance wrapped in steel, tailored suits, sharp eyes, a portfolio that grew with every quarter. To himself, lately, he was numb. His assistant, David, recited tomorrow's New York schedule without looking up from his tablet. Board meeting at 9. Investor lunch at noon. Marketing review at 2. Ethan nodded mechanically, the weight of routine pressing on him. Somewhere between building an empire and living a life, he had lost the ability to feel surprised. Every day was a variation of the same meeting, the same polite laughter, the same hollow applause. Seeking distraction, Ethan reached down for his suitcase. The navy blue case had been set at his feet by airport staff minutes earlier. He unzipped it, expecting crisp shirts, briefing notes, the armor of a man who commanded boardrooms. But what greeted him stopped his breath. Inside was a soft peach-colored scarf, carefully folded, carrying the faintest trace of jasmine and honey. Beneath it were summer dresses, casual clothes in colors he had never worn. And at the bottom, a worn leather journal with petals pressed between its pages. For the first time in years, something inside Ethan stirred. It was as if a locked door inside him creaked open, letting in the scent of a life he had forgotten existed. "David," he called. His assistant snapped his head up. "Yes, sir." "This isn't my suitcase." Ethan's voice was sharper than intended. He lifted the scarf like fragile evidence, staring at it as though it held the answer to a question he hadn't known to ask. David frowned. "Should I notify the airline?" "No." Ethan's reply came instantly, almost possessive. "Find her, whoever this belongs to. Contact her immediately." He closed the suitcase carefully, fingers lingering on the peach scarf. He didn't know who Amelia Clark was, or why the perfume from her clothes haunted him already. All he knew was this: for the first time in a long time, he couldn't look away. Back in Toronto, Amelia had no idea she'd just walked out of the airport. dragging the beginning of a storm behind her. She only knew her legs ached, her eyelids were heavy, and the city lights outside her cab blurred into gold streaks on the windshield. She pressed her cheek against the cool glass, dreaming of her pillow. The navy suitcase sat in the trunk, quiet, waiting. It would not stay quiet for long. The next morning dawned the color of pewter. Toronto's skyline wore a thin mist that blurred the sharp edges of glass and ambition, and the Fairmont Royal York rose from Front Street, like a memory of old Canada brass railings polished to a glow, marble floors cool underfoot, a lobby chandelier scattering light like snowfall. Amelia paused just inside the revolving door, fingers curled around the handle of the navy suitcase she'd brought to exchange. She felt small and out of place in a thrifted blazer and a dress she'd mended at the hem, but she lifted her chin anyway. She had opened Maple Bloom with less than this, less money, less certainty, less sleep, and somehow she'd still made it bloom. A man in a charcoal suit appeared at her elbow. "Miss Clark, I'm David Tran, Mr. Roy's assistant." His voice held the crisp neutrality of someone trained to make impossibilities feel routine. "He's ready for you." They crossed the lobby together. Amelia tried not to stare at the couples taking photos on the sweeping staircase, at the bellman whose posture could have balanced silver on it, at the spill of lilies in a giant urn near the concierge. She clocked them automatically, stargazer lilies. The scent too loud for this much brass, but gorgeous nevertheless. Florist brain, always on. David led her into a quiet lounge dressed in dark wood and soft green. The low hum of conversations pooled like a river around the room's edges. Then he stepped aside, and there he was. Ethan Roy stood near the window with Union Station and the CN Tower framed behind him, like stage props. In daylight, he was less myth and more man, but no less arresting. The suit was navy, the shirt white, the tie a shade of steel that picked up the cool of the morning. He didn't smile, not at first. He simply looked, an appraising, fully present look that landed like electricity. For a flicker of a second, his composure faltered, surprise moving over his features as though the person in front of him had not aligned with any of the prepared scripts. "Miss Clark," he said, and the baritone of his voice carried the room's width with no effort at all. "Mr. Roy," she managed, gripping the suitcase handle a little tighter. "I believe I owe you something." The corner of his mouth shifted, not quite a smile, not quite not. "And I believe I owe you the same." He gestured to an identical navy case at his feet. "Shall we trade the world back to its rightful owners?" It should have been simple, a switch, a thank you, a brisk handshake. But when her fingers brushed the handle of his suitcase, the faintest shimmer of perfume rose from the peach scarf folded inside jasmine and honey, warm and clean, and Amelia felt heat bloom in her cheeks. She glanced up and met his gaze. He had caught the same scent. In his eyes, the distant, diligent focus shifted, clicked into something like recognition. "May I buy you a tea?" he asked, as if he'd just remembered manners were a thing he kept for emergencies. "5 minutes. Then you can tell me to go to hell for the inconvenience." "Assam," she heard herself say, "or a strong English breakfast. The house blends here are too polite." The not smile made a second appearance, deeper this time. Noted. They sat at a corner table, sunlight falling in a long, bright rectangle across the linen. David vanished with the grace of someone who had learned vanishing was his best skill. A server took their order. For a moment, silence sat between them like a third guest. Amelia studied the pattern in the wallpaper. Ethan studied nothing at all, or perhaps everything at once. "Your journal," he said finally, and she startled. "The one in the suitcase, though." She pressed a palm to the table to steady herself. "You opened it." "Of course you did." "I would have, too." Her laugh came quick, a defensive sparkle. "I press petals into its stems, bits of fern. It's a habit, a compulsion. I tell myself it's research, but really it's just love." "I thought so." He didn't blink. "I also thought, whoever pressed those flowers understands restraint better than most of the designers I hire." The tea arrived, 2 immaculate cups, steam rising in thin veils. Amelia wrapped her hands around warm porcelain. "I'm a florist," she said, because it felt necessary to declare her ordinary. "Maple Bloom, on Queen East. I make bouquets for people when they're brave enough to say things out loud." "What things?" "Sorry, I forgive you." I love you. I miss you. Congratulations. Goodbye. She looked at him over the rim of her cup. All the sentences we're terrible at in this country. He didn't smile this time. Something gentler moved there, a softening that somehow didn't collapse his authority. He glanced toward the window, then back at her. I have looked at more mood boards than I care to admit, he said. Most of them shout. Your journal whispers. It makes the viewer do the work of leaning in. There's dignity in that. Amelia's ribcage made a quiet, traitorous expansion. Thank you, she said, and felt how inadequate the words were. He set his cup down, aligned it with the saucer as if that made the next sentence easier to say. I want to hire you, short-term, a consulting role. We're reworking a campaign in Montreal to launch a new line next quarter. The creative is close, but not alive. I need it alive. She blinked. The hotel room rotated a degree, then clicked back into place. I think you have the wrong girl. I sell posies to neighbors and make bridal bouquets that won't fit through car doors. I don't, she gestured vaguely at the skyline. Do this. You do composition, he said. You do color theory with an instinct most art directors fake. You do negative space like a prayer. And you do restraint. He leaned in the smallest fraction. I need restraint. Her first reflex was to laugh it off, to put on the armor of self-deprecation. Her second was to say yes so quickly she'd trip. Instead, she breathed. What would this consulting entail? 2 weeks, he said. Begin with a review of our scent library and packaging prototypes in Montreal. Then work with the team to define palettes and physical installations for an experiential launch. We're courting subtlety. We keep missing it. He slid a card across the table, heavy, unpretentious, embossed with nothing but his name and a direct number. No titles, no flourish. She picked it up and felt how cool the ink had been allowed to remain. Compensation? She asked, half because she had to, have to prove to herself she had any spine at all. Fair. A pause, and then some. Amelia stared at the card. On another morning, in another life, she might have said yes on the spot. But she had built her days like scaffolding. Early deliveries from the flower market on Gerrard, orders for the cafe that favored ranunculus, Mrs. Sadiq's weekly peonies when they were in season, funeral sprays that never got easy, the loneliness that sometimes followed the wedding consultations home. A life could be humble and still be whole, couldn't it? She placed the card in her bag. I'd need to think, she said, voice as steady as she could make it. My shop isn't easily abandoned, of course. He inclined his head as though she'd said something not only reasonable but admirable. Consider this an invitation, not a demand. They both rose at once. For a heartbeat they stood too close, and the perfume ghosted the air again, jasmine and honey. Like a remembered summer, like a dare. The noise of the lounge returned in a rush, ice chimming in a glass somewhere, a laugh aloud. The lobby clock striking the quarter hour. David reappeared with a discreet efficiency. Car is ready, sir. Thank you. Ethan looked back to Amelia. I'm in Toronto until tomorrow noon. He checked his watch. Even that gesture had precision. If you decide before then, call. If not, call anyway. I'm not particularly good at waiting, but I'm learning, are you? She teased, and the surprise of her own courage made her grin. Learning. He considered it. Trying, he said, and there, finally, was the real smile, a brief, disarming thing that made him look less like a headline and more like a person holding back. Laughter at something private. Outside the hotel. Front Street was a small theater of movement, taxis nosing past streetcars, cyclists slipping through seams, tourists pointing at the clock tower. The air had warmed. Toronto did that, gray to bright without warning. David guided Ethan toward a waiting sedan. Amelia stepped aside, suddenly awkward with her hands and the suitcase and the thousand versions of the rest of her life, crowding into a single corridor. Miss Clark, Ethan said, the car door half open, his gaze catching hers like a hook. If you say no, I'll understand, will you? She asked and realized she wanted to know. His answer came quiet, honest. I'll try. He ducked into the car. The door thumped shut. The sedan merged with the river of traffic and was gone. The hotel's revolving door breathed people in and out behind her. For a long moment, Amelia stood very still, the city moving around her like weather. In her bag, the card pressed cool against the lining. In her lungs, the ghost of jasmine refused to leave. Back on Queen East, Maple Bloom would be opening soon. The morning's delivery would be waiting. Tulips shyly cupped, eucalyptus with its coin leaves, roses yawning themselves awake. She pictured the chalkboard sign she leaned every day against the shopfront brick, fresh, seasonal. Honest, it had felt quaint when she wrote it. Today the words felt like a map. She turned toward the subway. On the way down the stairs, she pulled out her phone. Her thumb hovered over the keypad. She typed E and stopped. Then she slid the phone back into her pocket and smiled at no one. 5 minutes. She promised herself. One walk through the shop with the lights on. One look at the bouquets lined like little soldiers on the workbench. Then decide. Up above, the CN Tower speared the finely blue sky. In the lounge at the Royal York, a peach scarf held a scent that would not be argued with. And somewhere between those 2 points between the ordinary and the impossible, Amelia began to consider that maybe a life could be humble and also become something else when you least expected it. The bell above the door of Maple Bloom jingled with its usual cheerful chime, a sound Amelia had trained herself to find grounding no matter how chaotic the day outside might be. The little shop smelled of damp earth and eucalyptus. The floors bore faint water stains from years of buckets being dragged across them. She exhaled. Here, she was safe. Here she was Amelia Clark, florist, business owner, not the woman who had sat across from Ethan Roy at the Royal York and been offered a seat at a table. She had never even dared to imagine. She slipped behind the counter, laid her bag aside, and flicked on the row of pendant lights that washed the bouquets in honey-colored glow. Ranunculus tulips, roses, her world of stems and thorns and tiny victories. She leaned into it until the bell rang again. The man who entered didn't belong in a flower shop on Queen East at 9:30 in the morning. His suit had been pressed with military precision. His shoes caught the light. And when he said her name, Ms. Clark, it landed with the weight of a verdict. Amelia nearly dropped her scissors. Mr. Roy. He stood there, so composed, as though stepping into her tiny, cluttered sanctuary were no stranger than stepping onto a boardroom stage. Behind him, David hovered, phone already in hand, cataloging schedules like oxygen. I should have called, Ethan said, voice a degree softer than yesterday. But I wanted to see where you work. His gaze traveled the shop, resting on the window display, the chalkboard with honest flowers scrawled in looping chalk, the mismatched shelves lined with pottery from local artisans. He looked not like a man scouting a supplier, but like someone reading a book in a language he had forgotten and was desperate to relearn. Amelia tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. It's alive, he corrected. Do you mind if I look? She gestured toward the blooms, watching Ethan Roy Billionaire. Boardroom shark bend his tall frame to sniff a cluster of wild daisies. Was surreal enough to border on comedy, yet when he straightened, there was nothing ironic in his expression. These aren't like the arrangements out front, he observed. They're not meant to be, Amelia said, feeling steadier now that she was talking about flowers. The window bouquets are, well, they're what people expect. Perfect, symmetrical, polite. These, she lifted a bundle of imperfect stems, a wild mix of lupine and Queen Anne's lace. These are what I call honest flowers. They're a little crooked, a little unpredictable. They make you stop and look twice. That's beauty to me. Ethan touched one of the blooms with the same reverence another man might have reserved for a diamond. Honest flowers, he repeated, the phrase tasting new on his tongue. A customer bustled in just then. Mrs. Patterson, hair in its usual meticulous bun, here for her weekly arrangement. Amelia hurried to greet her, wrapping roses with quick, practiced hands. Yet she felt Ethan's presence in every corner of the room, watching, absorbing. When Mrs. Patterson left, the shop quieted again. Amelia found him at the corner desk, studying a framed photograph of her grandmother holding a bouquet nearly as big as her torso. Is this her? He asked. Yes, Amelia said softly, surprised at the tightness in her chest. How did you know? You have the same smile. He set the frame down carefully, almost reverently. Then, as though the intimacy of that moment had to be balanced, his tone shifted. The perfume. Jasmine and honey. Do you wear it often? Her cheeks heated. Sometimes, when I want to remember her. His mouth curved, not quite a smile, but warmer than before. It suits you. Silence stretched, the kind that made the air itself hum. Then Ethan slipped a folder from his leather briefcase and laid it on the counter. Here, he said. Inside were glossy proofs, prototypes of packaging, and concept sketches for a campaign. We've been circling ideas for months. Nothing breathes. Nothing whispers. I think you could change that. Amelia traced a finger over one of the mock-ups. A sleek bottle against a sterile white background. Beautiful, but cold. You want me to? To do what you do here, he said simply. To make it alive. She laughed, the sound brittle. Mr. Roy, I'm not an art director. I'm not even trained in design. I'm a florist. You're an artist, he countered, firm but not unkind. You just haven't called yourself one yet. Her throat tightened. She wanted to say no, to protect her small world, her small shop, her carefully stacked scaffolding of stability. But when she looked at him, she saw no sales pitch, no boardroom agenda, only a man who had opened a suitcase full of someone else's life and found himself unwilling to close it again. I'll think about it, she murmured. Ethan inclined his head, as if that were victory enough. Do that, and Amelia. His gaze lingered on her hands, ink-stained from stems, strong from years of lifting buckets. Not everything extraordinary happens in a boardroom. Sometimes it begins with an accident at baggage claim. He left then, David trailing behind. The shop bell jingling once more. The air seemed to still in their absence, as though the flowers themselves had paused to listen. Amelia stood in the middle of her shop, folder in hand, jasmine still ghosting the air. And for the first time since Matthew left, since the long, lonely nights of survival, she felt the tremor of a question she had almost forgotten how to ask. What if more was possible? The train to Montreal hummed beneath Amelia's feet, carrying her eastward along the St. Lawrence. Through the window, the landscape unrolled in a blur of forest, river, and farmland, each frame reminding her she was leaving her safe, known world behind. A week ago she had been sweeping petals from the floor of maple bloom. Today she was hurtling toward a boardroom of strangers who spoke the language of profit margins and quarterly growth. She twisted the edge of her scarf around her fingers, trying to anchor herself to something familiar. When the train slowed into Gare Centrale, she spotted Ethan almost immediately on the platform. He stood with the stillness of someone accustomed to being noticed. Navy overcoat perfectly tailored, David close at his side. He greeted her with a nod that managed to be both formal and oddly reassuring. Welcome to Montreal, he said. Thanks, she replied, voice steadier than she felt. It's colder than Toronto. A flicker of amusement touched his mouth. Then we'll keep you warm with too many meetings. The offices of Royce & Co. occupied 3 floors of a sleek glass tower near Old Montreal. As the elevator opened onto the main floor, Amelia was hit by a rush of sensory detail. White walls, polished steel, giant digital screens looping campaigns that featured models in gowns flowing like waterfalls. She felt suddenly underdressed in her wool skirt and cardigan. The conference room was already full. Men and women in sleek black, tapping on tablets, whispering to one another. Amelia's presence drew glances, some curious, some skeptical. At the far end of the long table, Ethan took his seat like a conductor stepping to the podium. This is Amelia Clark, he introduced calmly. She'll be consulting on the new fragrance campaign. A ripple of surprise moved through the room. One woman, elegant in red lipstick, arched a brow. A florist, she said, not unkindly, but not without bite. Amelia's palms dampened. She wanted to shrink, to retreat into invisibility. But Ethan's gaze pinned the room. She has an eye we don't, he said flatly. That's why she's here. He turned to Amelia. Show them. The folder he'd given her in Toronto was suddenly too heavy in her hands. She laid it open, exposing the sterile prototypes. These are beautiful, she began, but they're perfect to perfect. Fragrance isn't perfect, it's memory, it's skin, it's moments you don't plan. She slid out her journal, pages filled with pressed flowers. A hush fell. This is what I call honest flowers. They're crooked, a little wild, but they force you to feel. A scent should do the same. The woman in red lipstick tilted her head. And what would that look like in a campaign? Amelia swallowed, heart racing. She hadn't prepared slides, hadn't rehearsed. She only had instinct. Less polish, more breath. Imagine displays not of flawless roses, but of stems in every stage bud, bloom, wilt. Packaging with space, with air that whispers instead of shouts. A campaign that says, beauty is fleeting, so lean in while it's here. Silence. The kind that could crush or crown. Then Ethan spoke. That's the direction, he said, tone final. Alive, whisper, not shout. The room shifted. Heads bent over notes, tablets lit, conversations restarted. And just like that, Amelia realized she hadn't drowned. She'd swum. That evening, Montreal wrapped itself in light. Street lamps glowed against cobblestones in Old Port, the air fragrant with roasting chestnuts from a corner vendor. Ethan insisted on dinner at a quiet bistro tucked between art galleries. The tables were small, the candles low. Amelia sipped her wine, nerves finally beginning to soften. You didn't have to defend me today, she said. Yes, I did, he countered. They needed to hear you. They think I'm a joke, she said quietly. They think you're a disruption. Ethan corrected. That's different, and it's exactly what we need. He leaned back, watching her as though she were another puzzle he wanted to solve. Then his voice dropped. Do you know what caught me first when I opened that suitcase? She shook her head. The scarf, yes. The pressed flowers, yes. But more than that, the perfume. Jasmine and honey. It's been a long time since a scent stopped me cold. I can't forget it. Her glass trembled slightly in her hand. No one had ever said something like that to her, not with such steady intensity. She wanted to deflect, to laugh, but the truth bloomed hot in her chest. It was my grandmother's. I wear it when I want to remember her. It suits you, he murmured, just as he had in her shop. But now the words carried a different weight, one that made her pulse quicken. Later, walking back to her hotel through cobbled streets, Amelia pulled her scarf tighter against the night chill. Montreal glimmered around her, romantic and strange, and somewhere deep inside, a dangerous thought took root. Maybe she belonged not only among flowers and chalkboard signs, but also here, in this larger world, with a man who made her feel seen in ways she hadn't believed possible. She told herself it was just business, just consulting, just 2 weeks, but the echo of his words followed her all the way to her room. I can't forget it. Toronto looked different when Amelia returned from Montreal. It wasn't the streets or the skyline that had changed, it was her. She carried with her the hush of the boardroom when she spoke, the way Ethan's voice had cut through the silence to anchor her words, and the memory of candles flickering across a bistro table while his gaze lingered too long. Back at Maple Bloom, the routine returned, buckets of tulips from the market, Mrs. Patterson's weekly roses, chalk dust on her palms from the sign outside. Yet everything felt altered. The shop, once her entire world, now seemed small compared to the glass tower in Montreal where her ideas had carried weight. And then came the storm. It began with a headline, Mystery. Florist captures billionaire's attention. Amelia froze in front of her phone screen, tea cooling in her hand. The article showed a blurry photo snapped outside the bistro. Her scarf, her laugh caught midair. Ethan leaning in too close. The text speculated wildly about their secret partnership, their romantic dinners, her supposed overnight leap into the luxury world. By the time she reached the shop, customers were whispering. One regular grinned knowingly. So, Amelia, when do we see you on magazine covers? She laughed it off, but her stomach was a knot. Her phone buzzed again. Ethan, don't read the comments. We'll handle it. But she had read them. Words like gold digger, and nobody scrolled endlessly, voices dismissing her shop, her work, her worth. She slammed the phone down on the counter, breath sharp. That evening, Ethan came to her apartment for the first time. It was small, shelves overflowing with vases, a couch with a worn blanket, the faint scent of lavender sachets in the air. He looked almost comically out of place. 6 feet of CEO in a space barely big enough for her and her dreams. You should have told me, she said, arms crossed. Told you what? That this, she waved her phone, was inevitable? That being near you meant becoming a headline? He sighed, pulling at his tie as if it were strangling him. I wanted to protect you from it. You can't, she shot back. You live in a world where people are always watching, waiting. I sell flowers to neighbors who know my name." Her voice cracked. "And now they're looking at me like I don't belong." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Sharp as glass dot, then Ethan stepped closer, his voice low. "Do you think I belong? The world I live in, it doesn't care about me, Amelia. It cares about the image, the profit. When I opened your suitcase, when I smelled that perfume, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Awake." Her heart stuttered. He reached for her hand. "Don't walk away because of noise. Don't let strangers decide what this could be." But Amelia pulled back. "What is this, Ethan? Am I your consultant, your distraction, or something else?" His jaw tightened, and for the first time she saw not the polished CEO, but the man beneath, the one uncertain of his own answers. "I don't know yet," he admitted, "but I know I don't want to let go." Her chest ached with the weight of conflicting worlds. Her quiet shop, his endless spotlight, her honesty, his control. She wanted to believe him, wanted to step closer, but fear pressed its thumb against her ribs. She turned away, staring at the window where the city lights blinked like distant stars. "Maybe I need to figure out if I want to belong in your world at all." Behind her, Ethan's voice came softer than she'd ever heard. "Or maybe," he said, "we need to build a world that belongs to us both." The next morning, paparazzi lingered outside her shop. Reporters angled microphones at passing customers, asking about the billionaire's florist. Amelia shut the blinds, heart hammering. For the first time, Maple Bloom didn't feel safe, but inside her bag, Ethan's card still burned like a dare. One call, and the world tilts again. She wasn't sure if she was terrified or tempted that the week blurred into a whirlwind Amelia had never asked for. She woke each morning to a chorus of notifications, messages from friends who suddenly wanted details, reporters fishing for quotes, even strangers sending cruel jokes about the florist who caught a billionaire. She had never felt so visible and so invisible at the same time, that in Maple Bloom. The flowers became her refuge. She buried herself in arrangements, hands moving faster than thought, heart searching for calm in stems and petals. Yet even there, whispers bled through. Customers leaned close, voices low but sharp. Is it true? Is she really with him? One evening, just as she was locking up, a courier appeared at the door carrying a flat, ribbon-tied box, delivery for Amelia Clark. She frowned. From who? The man shrugged. No card. Her pulse kicked as she slid the ribbon loose. Inside was a bottle of perfume, simple glass, etched with her name. The liquid glowed gold in the dim shop light. She lifted the stopper, and the familiar scent of jasmine and honey curled into the air. Her grandmother's perfume. Amelia's knees nearly buckled. Ethan hadn't just noticed. He had gone as far as to recreate it. The phone rang before she could breathe. "Do you like it?" Ethan's voice, low and uncertain. She swallowed hard. "You had no right." "I had every right," he countered softly. "Because the moment I opened that suitcase, that scent, it changed everything. I couldn't forget it. I still can't." Her fingers tightened around the bottle. "You can't fix this with gifts. I'm not trying to fix anything. I'm trying to tell you I see you. Not the florist the papers want to make into a spectacle. Not the consultant my board doesn't understand. You. The woman who presses wildflowers into pages because she knows even imperfection deserves to be remembered." Silence stretched across the line. Amelia pressed the bottle to her chest, torn between the warmth of his words and the fear clawing at her ribs. "Ethan," she whispered, "I don't know if I can live in your world." "Then let me into yours," he said quickly. "Show me the world where honesty matters more than headlines." 2 days later, they met halfway. In Niagara-on-the-Lake, far from the noise of Toronto and Montreal. The town was quiet in early spring, vineyards stretching bare against a gray sky, the lake glinting cold and restless. They walked through empty streets until they reached a small cafe tucked away from curious eyes. Inside, warmth greeted them with tables, old jazz crackling from speakers. Ethan looked different here, less polished, almost human in his dark sweater, shadows under his eyes betraying sleepless nights. "You're wearing the scarf," he said, breaking the silence. "It matches my eyes," Amelia replied, though her tone carried a challenge. She wasn't ready to give in. Not yet, he nodded, accepting her resistance. I deserve that. For a while they spoke of simple things, the weather, the campaign, how Montreal had felt to her. Slowly, cautiously, Ethan let honesty slip through the cracks. When I was younger, all I wanted was to prove myself, he admitted. Every meeting, every deal, it was about showing the world I could build something from nothing. But now, I wonder if I've been building walls instead. Amelia studied him, unsure whether to comfort or confront. And you think breaking into my life makes you free? His eyes met hers, raw in a way she had never seen. When I smelled that perfume, I felt awake. For the first time in years, I felt alive. And when I'm with you, Amelia, that feeling doesn't fade. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought the cafe might hear it. Part of her wanted to believe him, to fall into the intensity of his gaze. Part of her wanted to run. She set her cup down carefully. This can't just be about a scent, Ethan. It isn't, he said. It's about the woman who wore it, the woman who won't let me look away. Later that evening, as they walked by the lake, the wind tugging at her scarf, Amelia finally stopped. The water churned silver under the fading sun. Ethan, this is too much, she said, voice breaking. The attention, the pressure, the headlines. It's not my life. I don't know if I can survive it. He turned to her, hands in his pockets, expression stripped of all CEO confidence. Then don't survive it. Change it, with me. We'll figure it out. One day at a time. Amelia stared at him. The man whose world terrified her, whose presence electrified her, whose gift sat heavy in her bag, a bottle of perfume that carried her past and their beginning. For the first time, she let herself imagine it. Not just consulting, not just fleeting meetings and whispered dinners, but something real. The waves lapped at the shore. She inhaled, the perfume lingering on her skin, and whispered, maybe. Ethan reached for her hand. Then it's enough. The launch night in Montreal glittered with everything Amelia Clark had once believed belonged to someone else's story. Floodlights bathed the glass atrium in gold. Journalists angled microphones at models in silk, and the scent of the new fragrance, her Honest Flowers campaign, drifted through the air. Like a secret finally spoken aloud. Amelia stood near the back, hands trembling around a champagne flute. Her designs were everywhere, arrangements that leaned wild instead of perfect, packaging that whispered restraint, installations that made guests lean in as if to catch a breath of something fleeting. For the first time, she saw her vision reflected on a stage that spanned continents. Then Ethan stepped up to the podium. In his dark suit, backlit by a wall of blooms she had chosen, he looked every inch the CEO. His speech was precise, powerful. Yet when his eyes found hers across the crowd, his voice softened almost imperceptibly, as if the words were meant for her alone. Beauty, he said, isn't about perfection. It's about honesty. It's about what makes us stop, what makes us feel. That's what this campaign is about. And that's what she reminded me of. Gasps rippled quietly. Heads turned to find her. Amelia's pulse roared. She had wanted invisibility, but Ethan had made her visible. Not as a scandal, not as a prop, but as the soul behind the work. After the applause, he slipped through the crowd, took her hand, and whispered, "Come with me." They left the hotel behind, walking until the noise dimmed and the St. Lawrence stretched dark and quiet under the moon. The city lights shimmered across the water, fractured but beautiful. Ethan stopped, still holding her hand. For once, there was no assistant, no cameras, no schedule. Just them, Amelia, he said, and the way her name fell from his lips made her knees weaken. Since that night I opened your suitcase, I've been trying to make sense of it. Of why a scarf, a perfume, a journal of pressed flowers could shake me awake. The truth is, it wasn't those things. It was you. You're the reason I remembered what it means to feel. Her breath caught, every wall she had built trembling. Ethan, I love you. The words landed like a stone dropped in still water, spreading ripples through the night. Not because you make my campaigns better, not because the world is suddenly watching. I love you because you see beauty in imperfection, because you make me want to slow down, because you make me alive. The night air stung her cheeks. For weeks she had fought the pull, clung to fear, told herself she didn't belong. But here, by the lake, with his voice stripped bare, she felt the truth bloomed too strong to deny. Her fingers tightened around his. "I love you too," she whispered, and the relief in her chest was like finally exhaling after years of holding her breath. They kissed there, under the quiet sky of Quebec, jasmine perfume mingling with the crisp scent of water. The world would keep spinning headlines, meetings, skepticism. But in that moment, it didn't matter. Amelia was no longer just the florist from Queen East. Ethan was no longer just the CEO in glass towers. Together, they were something else, two worlds colliding, breaking, and remaking themselves into one. And somewhere in the distance, a suitcase sat in an airport storage room, forgotten. The accident that had begun it all. Sometimes fate doesn't knock. Sometimes it hands you the wrong bag. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to open it, you find your life inside.